Fabled Quasar. What started off as a cheap ripoff of the Dark World archetype that got thrown into Hidden Arsenal 2 with no clear identity of its own, has evolved over time to become a versatile synchro spam toolbox with a whole community dedicated to it. Whether you love Quasar decks or you hate Quasar decks, you have to appreciate just the adaptability and the resilience of these little fiends. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I'm casually familiar with the Fabled deck. But you may not have been playing the deck non-stop for nearly 2 years, and let's say that you decide to build this deck in real life and take it to locals to show off your mad synchro prowess. There are actually a couple of quite complicated Rowlings that might stand in the way of you and an EXO record, so without further ado, let's get right into some interactions and Rowlings you'll need to know before you play Fabled Quasar in the real. Now, just a quick disclaimer, some of these are going to be more applicable to more like a local setting, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro will take care of a lot of this for you, but yeah, there are some that'll still apply if you do play only virtual, so let's get right into it. So this first one's not really that complicated, but you know what, I figured I'd throw it in there, just because I've had this one pulled against me at locals. Namely, the interaction is what can and can't Quasar negate. Now, you may be thinking, this would be a simple issue, right? You may be quick to say that Quasar can negate any spell speed 2 effect or lower that doesn't have like a super poly-esque you cannot respond effect on the end. Well, you'd be right. Quasar's effect to negate can be chained to any spell speed 2 or lower effect, meaning, you know, spell cards, non-counter traps, and all monster effects. That does not prevent other effects from being activated. You can use Quasar in the damage step, you can use Quasar in damage calc, you can use Quasar in a house, you can use Quasar with a mouse. It really is that simple. So when some deskbot playing Scrub tries to tell you that Quasar can't negate deskbot 4, you are properly armed to end that debate with the quickness. Again, number 4 is pretty simple, but a little bit unintuitive, and you can only really learn it by trial and error. Now, luckily for you, I've done a whole lot of trials with this deck and made a whole lot of errors. So this really concerns the card Desynchro, and this is one that you're going to find really applicable on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro too, even if you don't ever touch the deck in real life. So Desynchro lets you return a Synchro monster on either side of the field to the extra deck, then if the materials are in your graveyard, special summon them to your side of the field. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but that sneaky word "your" in there means that if you return an opponent's monster to the extra deck, they don't get the materials back because they're not in your, meaning the person who activated Desynchro's, graveyard. But that's not all you have to worry about with Desynchro. Even if you made, let's say, a Reagan using 2 materials, even if they're both in the graveyard, when you use Desynchro, there is a situation where they won't come back to your side of the field. If you special summon the Chawa from the grave and then use it as a Synchro material monster for something else, Desynchro can't bring it back. Or if either material, the Chawa or the Grimro, was brought back to the hand with monster reincarnation or something, and discarded again, it can't be brought back. Now this is more applicable if you're playing on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro or DevPro, since most players in the real don't even know that Desynchro exists, much less are keeping track of which materials go where. But if you have like a super skilled, Synchro player facing you, he could call you out on it, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. It'll save you a lot of headaches. So for number 3, this is actually like a core mechanic of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I figured I'd talk about it for you guys. And this is really the main way you're able to make synchro plays with the deck, and it's taking advantage of SEGOC. Now SEGOC is an old school mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! That dictates how chains form, and it stands for Simultaneous Effects Go on Chains. It basically says that there's a hierarchy to how effects that happen at the same time are placed on chains. And this really makes it so that every chain isn't just chaos with any effect going wherever it wants. A turn player's mandatory effects will always go on the chain first, then the opponent's mandatory effects will be next, then the turn player's optional effects, and finally the opponent's optional effects are last on the chain. If there are multiple effects within the same category, so you have like 2 of your mandatory effects, then you get to choose what order they go on, but they will always be on the chain before anything in a later category. Now practically this means that the mandatory effects of TG Hyper-Librarian and Tuningware will always be on lower chain links than the optional effect of Fabled Reagan, meaning that yes, Librarian and Reagan stack draws. Also, if you're playing Synchro Fusionist or another card that gets an optional effect when it's Synchro summoned, you can choose to place that effect as Chain Link 1 and Reagan's optional effect to draw as Chain Link 2, so you can get both a search and a draw. Manipulating SEGOC lets you get more out of Reagan, and that's always a good thing. This is easily the role I had to explain the most on DN and at locals, but as long as you know how SEGOC works and you understand that chains resolve backwards, you're well equipped to deal with all those haters trying to steal your draws. So, we're going back to Desynchro for this one. But it's a completely separate rolling from the Disturbed Materials one. This rolling regards to what once per turn effects you can and cannot use more than once per turn. I know, that sounds a little bit silly, but bear with me. So there are two classes of once per turn effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Hard and soft once per turn effects. If you look at a card like Ancient Fairy Dragon, it says, once per turn you can special summon one level 4 or lower monster from your hand. Now, compare that card to the text on Stardust Charge Warrior. When this card is synchro summoned, you can draw one card. You can only use this effect to Stardust Charge Warrior once per turn. That's a pretty obvious difference, and the practical application of this rolling is that a soft once per turn effect will get reset when you flip the synchro monster back with a Desynchro. So you can summon from your hand with Ancient Fairy, spin it back with a Desynchro, and then synchro for Ancient Fairy again and special summon again, whereas hard once per turns can't be reset. Now, before we get to the most important rolling to know, I'd like to go over some quick rollings I didn't want to go in depth on, but you might come up against. So in rapid fire fashion, double summon doesn't stack with any other normal summon effects, such as Seraphonites. Armory Arm's burn effect doesn't apply against pendulum monsters, and finally, Quasar will lose any additional attacks he has if his effect ever gets negated or he goes face down. Well, what else could it be? I'm going to talk about missing the timing for the number one spot, perhaps the most hated and poorly understood mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! So luckily for most players, Konami has seen fit to make most cards that have been released since Duelist Alliance unable to miss the timing, so you typically won't need to worry about this problem if you're playing a current deck. Unfortunately, if you're watching this for hints, you're playing a 5-year-old deck, so a lot of the cards are going to be able to miss timing. I'll briefly start by explaining what can miss the timing and what can't miss the timing. There's effectively 4 formats in which Konami writes card effects, that being if X, do Y, if X, you can Y, when X, do Y, and when X, you can Y. The if and when operators at the start of the effect tell you how the game state's going to recognize the card needs to activate. If effects only care that an effect happens, so no if effect is ever going to miss timing. And any effect with the do as opposed to you can won't miss timing either since it's a mandatory effect, so it has to happen. The only effect that can miss timing are when X, you can Y effects. And they'll miss the timing when the condition telling the game state, cool, activate this effect, isn't the last action on the chain. This means the condition is met on a resolving chain, so when the effect tries to hop on the chain, there are other links in the chain that still needs to be resolved, and the effect misses its timing to get on that chain because chains can't be interrupted while they're resolving. That's fine and all, but how does it apply to us as Fabled players? Well, there's 2 basic effects in the deck that can miss timing. On-synchro summon effects and Quasar's destruction effect. On-synchro summon effects only miss the timing when you try and synchro summon during your opponent's turn using Formula's effects, so we'll start with those first. If you didn't know, Formula Synchron has an effect that lets you synchro summon on your opponent's turn, so if you want to use that effect to make a Trish or Black Rose to disrupt your opponent's strategy, you better make damn sure that Formula's effect goes on as Chain Link 1, or else your Trish or Black Rose will attempt to activate their effects during a resolving chain, making them miss timing. Now, Quasar's on-destruction effect is a bit more complicated in when it misses timing. It'll of course miss timing if it's destroyed as Chain Link 2 or higher, but also if it's tributed, because the tribute summon isn't an instantaneous action, so the last thing to happen is the monster you tributed Quasar for hitting the field, and not Quasar hitting the grave. Also, if it's used for a Synchro or Ritual monster, it's going to miss the timing for the same reason. It's pretty ridiculous that a rolling this antiquated and worn out still causes problems to some decks to this day, but that's just the game we play. Well, there you have it, prospective future Fabled players. You now know everything you need to take this deck into the highest tiers of competitive play. So use that power wisely. So what do you think? Do you feel one step closer to being a Fabled master? Or are you still in the dark? Let me know of any zany or wild rollings you have in the comments, and I'll see you soon.
Carry on, my wayward son. There'll be peace when you are done. Lay your weary head to rest. Don't you cry no more.